John Key's made it pretty clear that he's ruled out your call to have Roger Douglas as the finance minister. In fact, it would seem that he's doing everything he can to distance himself from the idea that your party would have any at all influence over policy. Even if you do get another couple of MPs in the party, how can you have any influence over the political, financial environment?
Well, my experience of politics is two things. Ideas do matter. So if you turn up to Parliament and you've got ideas, I've noticed within our Parliament and within government circles, they do make a difference. I got my regulatory responsibility bill in front of the Commerce Committee as a consequence, just 2 MPs. The second thing that I've noticed is that the number of votes that you get do matter. So if we get the votes, that's a support for what we're saying, a support for our policies, and we will be able to make a difference. I can understand John Key saying that. He understands MMP. He's trying to cuddle up to the Labour Party and their policies in order to win the vote, not scare the horses. Sadly, if we do that... In
your opinion, do you think that's entirely what he's doing? Do you think that John Key is in actual fact hiding his true agenda in order to get the most votes possible?
No, I don't think John Key has a true agenda in that sense. I think they've figured out that they want to be in government, and the 2 major parties do that. It's no more than Helen Clark hiding her true agenda and saying, here are the policies that I need to adopt to win, and saying them and then doing them. And I think John Key's the same. That doesn't make the policies true or right or good for the country.
Excellent.
There's got to be a market for the truth.
There should be a market for the truth, just not often a lot of it available. Dr. Pita Sharples, you are often being cited at the moment as the potential kingmaker party. What are your views of the economic policies of both parties, and do you have separate ones that will be on the table in any sort of negotiations?
Yeah. I think obviously we are subject to the global situation, and the global situation has morphed into panic as people try to liquidate their assets and things. But here in New Zealand, we've had like 6 years of buoyancy in the financial area, and I think we've repaid quite a lot of our debt. So there is money in the government that I think should be used to keep our economy afloat and keep it buoyant. So I think we need the investment in the public to keep the money going, and we would support. We have 2 roles. One is to build the Maori capacity, and secondly to look after New Zealand as well. And so we would see the development of small banks to help small businesses develop, dropping of the small business tax to say 5% to 5%. But banks that allow, like there's this big Potama bank that's able to set off some Maori industries, but it needs to be now structured to help the little person so it doesn't get small industry back.
Does the Maori Party only care about the economic welfare of Maori?
Not at all. We care about all of New Zealand. See, that's the goal of being Maori. What is good for Maori is good for New Zealand. And because we've got to stop this business of pretending there's no gaps. There are gaps, and we have to close the job things. And that's why we put a lot of effort into closing the gaps, but taking New Zealand forward as a whole.
Excellent. Dr. Russell Norman, you're potentially one of the other parties that could be a kingmaker in this election. What are your views on the economic crisis for your party itself, but also for how do you feel about the solutions of both the major parties?
Well, we've got a coming together of a few crises, if you like. You've got an energy crisis and rising energy costs, a climate change crisis and a financial crisis all at once. And it seems to me the obvious thing to do is to have what I would call green infrastructure, or a Green New Deal, if you like. We need to invest in those kinds of infrastructure that will help us deal with climate change and rising oil prices, which is obviously things like public transport and insulating houses. The Green $1 billion housing fund to insulate houses is part of that. I also think that we need to learn the lesson of what's happened. Completely deregulating the financial sector failed. The banks spectacularly failed. So we need to learn the lesson that actually when you've got a key part of the economy like the financial sector, that in the end we're going to have to underwrite, we've got a right to regulate it and to make sure that it works properly. And I think that's one of the key lessons we need to learn from what's happened. I mean, in terms of national labour, I think Labor's infrastructure, investing in infrastructure is a sensible way to keep the economy ticking over. Unfortunately, they're planning to do a lot of it in building new motorways, which is a silly thing to do right now. And National's plan to not to have research and development tax credits and incentives for savings and use that on tax cuts, I think is a silly thing to do as well.
The country hasn't really cared about being economically green when it could afford it. Now it seems, if you listen to John Key's comments last night, we can't afford it. We can't afford the emissions trading scheme as it is now. We can't afford those things. How can we be both environmentally and economically green?
Well, if you look at the way the Kyoto Protocol works, if we keep increasing our greenhouse emissions, it's going to be very, very expensive for us. It's already very expensive and it's going to get worse. So it makes economic sense to reduce our greenhouse emissions. Also, when you look at the export sector, the New Zealand export sector is built around clean and green. Whether it's primary production or tourism, clean and green, 100% pure is a key part of it. And I think that if we undermine that, then we put at risk our long-term economic future. If New Zealand gets a reputation as a big polluter, which it could do because we've got very high greenhouse emissions per capita, then that will undermine our export sector and undermine our long-term economic future. So I think we've got to use our brains and don't say, oh, we've got to sacrifice the planet to save the economy. Actually, particularly for New Zealand, the two go together.
Excellent, thank you very much. Last night, bureaucracy was a big issue, and I guess it's an issue every time there's an election. Every party says to the other party that the bureaucracy is going out of control. John Key targeted bureaucracy as some kind of uncontrollable monster, hand-fed by Helen Clark, and his answer is to cap it from now on. I'm not sure if... do any of you know what the length of the cap is? No, that's just a cap at this point, and then at some point the cap will be removed. I'd like to know each of the parties' views on bureaucracy in New Zealand, and would there be job losses under their watch? Rodney Hide, we'll start with you. ACT love cutting back government expenditure. Can we expect to see thousands upon thousands laid off? Wellington are washed, unemployed social policy graduates from Victoria?
No, and I think it's a mistake, as John Key's done, to sort of target one input to government, which is people. What we're saying is that we need to limit the growth of, the government consumption of resources, if you like, to put it in green terms. And what we do is we say we should cap total expenditure and only adjust that for inflation. And let me just say this to my colleagues. You sit there and you say, well, we'll spend this and we'll spend that. At the end of the day, you're spending the people that are watching this show their money, because the government gets its money from tax. If you look to the forecast that we have now, the government is going to be running deficits of $6 and $7 billion. It is unsustainable. So you're either going to have to put taxes up or cut money from somewhere. Second of all, we're running a current account deficit of 7.3% of GDP, so the economy is not paying its way. And I think that politicians are sort of living in cloud cuckoo land a bit, including John Key and Helen Clark, when they say these are going to be the policies, we're going to be doing this, because at the end of the day, the resources that a politician commands to spend for some good purpose has to come from the people that are watching this show.
Excellent. Matt Robson, surely the Progressives are party to this explosion of cushy jobs. Does caucus now resemble some sort of gliding on? And what do you think should be culled from the bureaucracy?
Well, gliding on was a television program, and therefore they had the liberty of poetic license. And it's actually, if you translate that into political terms, it's actually an attack on people. I think Rodney used the word people, which is good to hear. And it's people in those jobs who work for New Zealanders. And the word public service is a good one. It means service for the public. Public service institutions have been set up because holes were there when people weren't being assisted, and actually the business, the economy was not being assisted. So if you go firing people, say in work and income, who are work brokers, who help people train to get into new jobs when they lose their jobs, who help them to get in more employment, I think that's a silly thing. It's cutting off your nose to spite your face. If you fire all those policy advisors who help governments to look at all the research and all the issues in health and education and other areas of the economy and the society, then once again you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. We did it in the 30s. We sacked public servants.
Do you think there's no fat in the public service sector?
Oh, well, there possibly is. If you go looking with a microscope, you can find deficiencies everywhere.